It had been months since Elijah had dealt with the mouther in Asheville, and months since he put a bullet between Father Alden's eyes. Months since he'd left that frostbitten town to bury its dead and reckon with his guilt. Since then, he'd seen to the killing of 5 demons and a dozen more or lesser creatures, feral ghouls with melted eyes, a vampire who'd roamed a burned-down highway church, and a succubus that had seduced a whole water commune into its death by dehydration. They all died like the rest, some with screaming, some with silence, but all with judgment. This town, he didn't know if it had a name or if it had forgotten it, had become his reprieve, an old world ruin of what had once been Las Vegas. The neon was dead, but the sin hadn't faded. The buildings stood like rusted ribs. The streets were loose sand and melted asphalt. Every corner carried a whisper of the world that had been, back when the lights had buzzed and money changed hands like blood. Now there was whiskey, sex, and the kind of laughter that always sounded a little too close to crying. For the past week, Elijah hadn't lifted a weapon, hadn't heard the ring hum. No visions, no pages turning in the scourge Bible strapped under his coat, no signs, only the ache in his ribs from old wounds and the dull edge of sleep that never seemed to sharpen. It was in every way a miracle, and he didn't trust it. Still, when the time came, he paid his coin and climbed the stairs of the inn with a woman whose smile didn't reach her eyes. She asked no questions. He liked that about her. Now they lay together in the dim light of a cracked lantern, the sheets twisted around her legs, Elijah half dressed and half asleep, the sweat not yet cold on their skin. Her name was Jennifer. Not a name made for this world, not anymore. Too clean, too suburban. But she said it without irony and without shame. It fit her in a way that made him think she never had the chance to be anything else. Her eyes were brown, sharp, and untrusting. Her voice was smoke and steel.
"You're not like the others who come through here,"
she said, lying beside him, one hand resting flat on her stomach, the other tucked under her head. Her voice wasn't flirtatious. It was observational, curious. She looked at him like he was a puzzle that he refused to finish. Elijah didn't respond right away. He stared at the ceiling, one arm under his head, eyes half-lidded. The lantern cast flickering shadows that looked like wings every time the wind caught the shutters. He hated how often he saw wings and shadows now.
"They always talk,"
she went on.
"Loud, like their voices will make them big enough to forget they're scared. You don't say much at all."
"I talk when there's something worth saying." She turned to her side, propped up on her elbow.
"And was tonight worth saying anything over?"
He didn't look at her, but the corner of his mouth turned just slightly. "Depends on how much of the coin you're gonna give back." Jennifer gave a low, amused hum and pushed the sheet off her legs. She was already reaching for her clothes, piece by piece, gathered from the floor. No shame in her. Just the easy routine of someone who did this often, but not carelessly.
Elijah, right?"
He nodded once.
"You always passing through?"
"That's the idea."
"You looking for something?"
He slid his legs off to the side of the bed and started pulling on his shirt. "Not looking. Just going where I'm told." She paused, glancing over her shoulder as she hooked her bra behind her back.
"By who?"
He didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, long enough that she almost moved on. "God," he said finally. Jennifer blinked, then gave a small scoff.
"You don't look like a preacher."
"I'm not."
"You don't pray."
"I do."
"Don't wear robes."
"No need."
You screw like a man who's trying to forget something.
That made him pause. He looked at her then, just briefly, eyes like dust and gunmetal. Tired, focused, hollow in the way a grave is hollow but not empty. Ain't trying to forget, just trying to feel something else. That silenced her just for a moment. She pulled her boots on without another word, then reached for her coin. He handed it over, no argument, no fuss.
You ever been east?
She asked, turning the coin between her fingers. Once or twice,
There's a place called New Galilee.
she said, watching him closely now.
2 days out. Built it from scratch. Big church in the middle. Real serious folk. Call their preacher Saint Michael.
Elijah froze at the name, only slightly. Enough that Jennifer noticed. Saint Michael, he repeated. She nodded.
That's what they call him. Like he's more than a man. They say he heals people. Grows crops in sand. Said he called an angel down once and it kissed a blind kid's eyes open.
Elijah felt the ring warm slightly on his finger. Not enough to burn, not yet. Jennifer continued, quieter now.
But I've heard things. From clients. From drunk mouths that forget how to whisper. People vanish out there. Not run off. Vanish. And the ones who stay start talking in tongues. Sometimes their voices change. Sometimes they don't come out of it.
Elijah pulled on his coat. She watched him fasten the buttons and slide the scourge Bible into place beneath the leather.
You one of those men who runs toward fire?
She asked. I don't run anywhere. She gave a nod, almost respectful.
You gonna go?
I reckon I am, Elijah said, as he felt the ring begin to pulse, begin to call him. Jennifer stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the hall light.
He might be the real thing, you know.
Elijah paused and looked at her. And so was the last one. He walked past her without another word. Downstairs, the bar was already roaring, and east, the ring burned just a little hotter. The bar behind him roared with broken laughter and off-key hymns. Glasses clinked, boots scuffed wood. Somewhere, a piano tried to hold a tune and failed. Elijah stepped out into the light like a man walking into something he already saw coming. The sky was thick with stars. No moon. Just open dark. The wind kicked dry grit across the road, lifting old wrappers and sun-bleached bones from the street gutters. Above, the shattered sign that once read, Paradise Casino, buzzed weakly, the sea flickering like it couldn't decide if it still believed in the word. He lit a thin match on his boot, touched it to the stub of a cigar, and walked. The stables were a few blocks off, half collapsed and boarded in places, but dry and well kept. The stable hand was long gone, passed out dead or drunk. Didn't matter. Elijah opened the stall and found Luther waiting. The black horse was broad-shouldered and still as stone, only the twitch of an ear acknowledging Elijah's approach. He was a huge beast of burden, a Clydesdale, fit for fighting, fit for whatever Elijah and the Lord required. His eyes were calm and unmoving. He didn't stomp, didn't shake, just turned his head as Elijah reached for the tack. "You remember Ashevale?" Elijah murmured. Luther blinked slowly. "Good. I sure as hell ain't forgot." The ritual was quiet. Not holy, not magical, just methodical and reverent. Elijah rolled out the bedroll, laid out the tools, and got to work. He checked Saint Breaker first. The cylinder clicked clean, Every bullet accounted for. The binding bullet, unused, gleamed faintly in the lantern light. He spun it once, slowly, then closed it with a practiced flick. He had still yet to replace the binding bullet from Ashvale. He now only had one. The saw blade came next, pulled from its sheath and run across a leather cloth. No nicks, still sharp. He wrapped a single link of the chain of Golgotha around the hilt, not for combat, just to remind the blade what it was meant to do. The scourged Bible was open last. Elijah flicked past Ash Street's pages until he found the most recent margin notes. Dried blood near the bottom. A town's name written in smudged pencil. Ashvale. Below it a single word. Mouther. He stared at it a moment longer than he needed to, then closed the book and strapped it to the small of his back beneath his coat. The ring of flame pulsed once, just enough to warm the bone. Elijah pulled the finger bone of Saint Merciful from its reliquary and checked the clasp. Still sealed, still holy, still heavy. He stood, stretched the pain from his spine, and looked at Luther. "No idea what we're riding into," he said, voice low and certain. "But the ring's heating up." Luther shifted just once. Elijah took one last drag from the cigar, crushed the ember beneath his boot, and threw his coat over his shoulders. The world didn't give him a sign. It never did. The only signs to be trusted would come from God himself, in the ring. He led Luther out of the stall and into the dark, where the road waited without welcome. The lights of the old city shrank behind him, a blur of rusted neon and cracked glass swallowed by the dark. As Luther trotted slowly along the broken highway, Elijah didn't look back. There was nothing worth remembering behind him. The only thing that ever mattered was what burned ahead. The stars above were sharp and cold, too many of them now that the sky had no satellites or smog to hide the view. They looked down on the land like distant watchers, patient, uncaring, and ancient. Elijah rode through what had once been suburbs. Now they were bone gardens. Ruined cul-de-sacs stretched to the horizon, husks of homes with walls blackened by fire and time. God's judgment of the sundering from the time before reigned hard here in the city of sin. The places which were the most unholy seemed to have been treated the worst. A playground lay half buried in red sand, its side melted down one side. A child's tricycle embedded in a tree like it had been thrown there by the hand of God. There was no wind, only dust that moved like breath from a sleeping beast. Luther's hooves echoed down a cracked overpass. Below, a dry river ran down through shattered concrete. The world had bled out here. You could feel it in your teeth. The ring on Elijah's finger burned. Throughout the night and throughout the day, Elijah had crossed into badland country. Scrub bush and salt flats, low hills and bleached rock spires. He dismounted in a narrow canyon choked with wind and old broken fence posts. That's when he heard them. Too light for boots, too fast for man. Ghouls. They always came in small packs out here, crawling from the caves like rats in need of meat. Elijah didn't curse, didn't reach for Saintbreaker. He stepped away from Luther, letting the horse back against the slope, and drew the saw blade in one fluid motion. They came out of the shadows, half-hunched, bones jutting where they shouldn't, eyes glowing pale like blind fish that had learned to hunt. Their mouths were open too wide. One of them hissed, long and sharp like a cat in heat. 4 of them. That was all. Elijah didn't move. The first one lunged, low, fast, bone spike arms raised. He sidestepped and brought the blade across his neck, The silver cut through cartilage and tendon like it was made for nothing else. The body dropped before the head finished turning. The second was smarter. It came from the side, but Elijah had already stepped into its blind spot, spun the blade up, and drove it beneath the creature's chin. The tip punched through the crown of his skull like a wet crack. He pulled the blade free and ducked. The third swiped at him, a jagged claw, but the sawn blade came up and caught the arm at the elbow, then the knee, then the throat. Fast and surgical. It crumpled, twitching. The last one hesitated. Its jaw clicked open, unhinging sideways like a spider's mandibles. Elijah locked eyes with it. The ghoul ran. He let it. He wiped the blade on one of the corpses and sheathed it. Didn't speak, didn't pray. There was no reason to thank God for making him a killer. He just got back to work. That night, Elijah made camp beneath a rusted billboard that once advertised perfume or pills. The wind bit at the fire, but he kept it small, just enough to heat his hands and ward off anything weaker than guilt. He ate from a tin, drank from a blackened canteen, didn't sleep with both eyes closed. Before he lay down, he looked up at the stars again and whispered a single line. Not scripture, just memory. Ain't no rest. The fire crackled, and Elijah took to sleep for the night. The sun rose red and slow behind Elijah as he rode east. The light cut across the flats in long spears, throwing shadows from rusted guardrails and dead cacti. The old highway beneath Luther's hooves cracked and groaned like it hated being remembered. The air smelled of sun-baked metal and dry blood gone to dust. He didn't speak, just rode, the rhythm of the horse and the wind carving a kind of meditation out of the silence. A buzzard circled once overhead, then another. They didn't land. Whatever they were waiting for hadn't died yet. By noon, the terrain had changed again, less open now and more treacherous. Valleys of blackened stone carved by heat that hadn't come from sun or magma, but something older. Broken fence posts marked a road that no longer connected anywhere. Signs pointed east, still clinging to the names of towns that hadn't drawn breath in decades. Red Bluff, Mercy Hollow, Galilee. Elijah didn't stop riding until the dust on the horizon resolved into shape. Not ruins, not monsters. People. A caravan, 5 wagons deep, rolling west. Wood painted, sun-bleached cloth flapping like prayer flags. No guards, no guns on show. Just smiling faces and raised voices. Elijah slowed Luther as they neared. One of the riders waved. "Traveler, you headed toward the light, then?" Elijah didn't answer. A woman walked alongside the third wagon, handing out papers. "The gospel of flame, the new word of the Lord, come and be made whole." Children in rags sang in unison from the back of a flatbed. "He walks on fire, he sings with angels, he holds the light in his hands." One of the men waved Elijah closer. His smile was too wide and his eyes too bright. "You're from far out? St. Michael's a real thing, friend. I seen him raise a woman from her own grave. Her flesh was green and bloated, and she opened her eyes and wept with joy." Elijah looked at him flatly. The man faltered just a little. "Well, he speaks with the messenger itself, you know. An angel, a real one. Wings like sunlight and a voice that makes the wind stop. You'll see." "I'll see," Elijah said and nudged Luther on. As they passed, one of the wagons started playing music from a broken speaker. Recorded chants warped by age and static. They sang of light. They never mentioned God by name. The ring burned in his hand. Just faint enough to ignore, but not faint enough to forget. By dusk, The land opened again. Long red plains and jagged foothills looming in the distance like crooked teeth. New Galilee was near. He could feel it. Not in the ground, not in the air, but in the silence. The way the wind stopped carrying sound. The way the stars felt to come early. Elijah made camp in the hollow of an old shipping yard. Rusted containers stacked like tombs, their doors chained shut by time or warning. He built no fire tonight, just rolled out of his bedroll, sat with his back against a container, and opened the Scourge's Bible. It didn't flip, it didn't hum, just waited. So did he. He watched the dark for a long time before sleep finally came, and in his dreams, a voice not his own whispered scripture that didn't exist. After he woke, he began his journey again. Elijah crested the ridge just after midday, the wind dead at his back and the summer like a hammer overhead. He'd seen towns before, ruins, dust-blown shells, cannibal outposts dressed in scripture and rot. But this one was different. Clean. White stone, new walls. Banners made of real cloth and not from skin. From a distance, New Galilee looked like a place that had never been touched by the sundering. It unsettled him more than the wasteland ever had. The streets were empty as he entered. No children, no hawkers, no beggars. Just rows of neatly kept buildings. Fresh paint on old wood. Verses carved into doorframes in a language half the world had forgotten. The ring on his finger pulsed once. Elijah rode slow through the first few blocks. The silence wasn't dead. It was waiting. Then he heard it. The sound rose like thunder wrapped in music. Voices, hundreds of them shouting, singing, cheering all at once. It came from deeper in town. He turned the corner and saw the cause. A great scaffold stood in the center of New Galilee, built from salvaged beams and steel rods, towering high over the gathered crowd. Hundreds, maybe 1,000 people stood shoulder to shoulder in the square. Some wept, some sang. Others simply stared with mouths open like they were breathing for the first time. At the top of the scaffold stood a man dressed in robes white as ash and gold trimmed like sunlight through a chapel window. His hair was silver, his face lean and sculpted. He didn't pace. He didn't shout. He spoke with a voice that carried like it was made of thunder and honey. Saint Michael. "And lo," he said, arms spread, "the Lord did not come to punish, but to perfect. He did not send wrath, he sent light. Not the kind that burns, but the kind that wakes the soul." The crowd roared. A wave of noise, raw and desperate, rolled through the square like it could knock down the scaffold. Elijah stopped just short of the crowd's edge. He dismounted and tied a Luther to an old fence post. No one noticed him. No one cared. Michael continued. "The old world worshipped from fear. They begged mercy from a vengeful throne, but that was not God. That was man's shadow cast across the heavens. This," he raised a hand to the sky, and a shaft of sunlight pierced through the clouds. "This is God's true face." Another roar. Someone fell to their knees sobbing. Michael lowered his hands and motioned to the steps. 2 men brought forth a child, a boy, maybe 10, with twisted legs and milky film over his eyes. He was carried on a blanket. The crowd quieted at once. "His name is Jonah," Michael said. "He was broken. The world told him he would die that way, but the Lord does not create what he cannot restore." He knelt beside the boy. Elijah watched, narrowing his eyes. The ring was quiet. The Bible under his coat didn't stir. Michael placed one hand on the child's brow and whispered something the crowd couldn't hear. Then it happened. A golden light, soft but real, began to rise from Michael's hand. It spread across the boy's skin like oil catching fire. The child cried out once, sharp and afraid, then fell silent. The crowd held its breath. The boy blinked. The clouds above parted further, sunlight hitting the scaffold like benediction. The boy moved his legs. He moved them. One foot shifted, then the other. The crowd exploded. He opened his eyes and the milky white film that was on them was gone. People screamed praise, shouted scripture, collapsed to the ground. Grown men wept openly. Women held their babies like relics. A blind woman near the front shouted, "He is the flame made flesh!" Elijah stood motionless. The boy sat up. Michael smiled and helped him to his feet. The child stepped forward once, then again, wobbling but upright. His hands trembled. Saint Michael didn't gloat. He didn't shout. He just smiled like a man who had finally been proven right. The noise washed over the square in crashing waves. Elijah stepped back into the shade of a column. He pressed the back of his hand to his coat. The ring was warmer now. Not burning, but no peace. He watched the crowd, watched Michael, watched the boy walk. If this was a lie, it was wearing truth too well. He touched the scourged Bible at his back, still closed. But he felt it. The pressure, the shift, the shadow that smelled like salvation. He'd seen men play God before, but this might be something worse. And it was only just the beginning. The sun was low by the time Elijah returned to the center of New Galilee. The light fell hard against the whitewashed buildings, casting long shadows across the dirt alleys and tight, spotless streets. Everything about the town looked too clean, too planned, like someone had taken the chaos out of human living and boiled it down to something brittle and sanitary. He'd spent the better part of the day walking it with Luther at his side, leading the horse through back lanes, outer roads, alleys that curved behind homes where voices rose and fell in rhythms he didn't like. Sermons leaked from open windows. Chants echoed from rooftops. Even the children played quiet, drawing symbols in dust instead of kicking stones or wrestling like they should. Every door frame had a word or phrase carved into it. Blessings, names, titles. But none of them mentioned Christ. None of them spoke of sin or sacrifice. Only flame, light, and the messenger. That alone was enough to make the ring on his finger twitch. They watched him, these people. Not with fear, not with suspicion, but with indifference. Elijah knew better than most. When a town stopped noticing strangers, something stronger than fear was holding their leash. By the time dusk set in, he'd seen what he needed to see. Not enough to name it, not yet, but enough to know that whatever spirit ruled this place, it wasn't interested in questions. He led Luther to a low-slung stable beside a shallow well and tied him off beneath a slatted awning. The horse exhaled heavily, stomping once before going still. Elijah rested a hand against his flank for a moment. Not for comfort, just acknowledgement, then turned toward the nearest light. The inn had no name, just a wooden sign cracked with age, showing a burned-in lantern and a crooked cross that someone had tried to scratch off halfway. It swung in the breeze like a broken metronome, creaking with each pass. Inside, the room was dim and hot. Lanterns glowed along the walls, and a fire snapped behind a battered iron gate. The scent of smoke, sweat, and boiled meat clung to the air. A dozen or so patrons filled the space, mostly men, worn-faced and quiet, hunched over cups or playing cards without speaking. No music, no laughter. Elijah stepped inside, letting the door close behind him with a soft wooden thud. The bar sat in the far left corner. Behind it stood a broad-shouldered woman with forearms like forged iron and a sharp braid tied tight against her spine. Her face had the look of someone who'd seen fights end two ways, fast and bloody, or long and worse. She glanced up as Elijah approached. Didn't smile, didn't speak. Just poured a drink into a dented tin cup and slid it across the bar. Elijah caught it without a word and took a long sip. The liquor was heavy, grainy, probably half fuel. A man like him didn't wince. The woman eyed him for a moment longer, then turned to polish a glass that didn't need polishing. Elijah leaned on the bar with one elbow, turning the cup slowly in his fingers. The light in here felt strange, soft and flickering, but without warmth. Like it was here out of obligation, not welcome. He let his eyes drift across the room, sweeping the booths and tables. The people slouched in their rituals. No one met his gaze. This place seemed different than the rest of the town. Like they weren't all in on what was going on. But in the far corner near the fire, 4 men hunched over their drinks, shadows cutting across their faces. Grizzled, hard-built. Not followers, not preachers. Men with hands like tools and eyes that didn't trust sunlight. He didn't catch their words, just one. Michael. The name wasn't said like a prayer, it was said like a curse. Elijah took another sip. The men in the corner didn't glance his way again, but their posture changed. Not much, just enough. Shoulders tensed. One man's hand drifted from his cup to rest on the table's edge. A casual move if you didn't know what it looked like to prepare for violence. Elijah finished his drink, set the cup down slow and pushed off the bar. He crossed the floor like a man walking through smoke. Slow, quiet, certain. When he reached their table, none of them looked up. He pulled out the empty chair. Didn't ask, just sat. The fire popped behind them, and somewhere upstairs a floorboard creaked. The rest of the inn held its breath. The man on the far left, bald, neck with sun-scarred tattoos, glanced at him sideways. "You lost?" "No." "You a preacher?" "No." "Then why the fuck you sitting?" Elijah leaned back slightly, letting his coat part just enough to show the knife handle at his side and Saint Breaker on the other. Not a threat, not a warning, just a truth. "I got a question about your saint." That got their attention. The man across from him, older, maybe 60, beard like barbed wire and a broken nose healed wrong, barked a short laugh without smiling. "You got a question, huh? That's bold. How about that? We got a man with questions." The one on the end, tall and narrow, finally looked up. "Shit ain't free around here." Elijah nodded once. He raised his hand and yelled for a round of beers at the table. The barmaid made her way over and poured without a word. He didn't wait for a thank you. The bearded man took his drink, sniffed it once like it might still hold poison, and drank deep. The others followed. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the tall one said, "All right, ask a question." Elijah didn't speak, just rested his forearms on the table. "You're not here for the sermons?" "No." "You're one of them zealots from the south? The ones who think flame's just a symbol and God's in the soil?" "No." The tall one grunted. "Then what the hell are you?" Elijah didn't answer. The men looked at each other. Small, quiet looks. Weight exchanged in glances. These weren't churchmen. These were the kind who buried bodies without prayer and never carved names on the markers. The bald one spoke up. "We've been here a long time. Before the robes, before the light shows. When Galilee was just a pile of shit and rust like every other place." He sipped his drink. "Michael came 5 years ago, preacher type. Gentle voice, carried a staff, not a gun. Read scripture in the square. Folks liked it. He fed people, dug wells, helped repair the north wall when the rotters came. He was real back then, or close enough," one of the men chimed in. Elijah's eyes didn't move. "What changed?" The tall man exhaled slow through his nose. "The light. That fucking thing," one of them muttered. "The messenger," one of them said, and the way he said it made it feel like the word was a disease. Elijah waited. "It came down on one of Michael's sermons, first time anyway. Light fell through the clouds, bright, white, and hot, like glass shattering in your soul. Nobody could look straight at it. We all dropped. I saw men scream like they were being peeled on the inside." The bald man tapped his temple with his 2 fingers. "Changed him, Michael. After that, started writing new verses, said God was speaking again. Healing people, preaching miracles. No more wrath, no more judgment, just light, always light. Never about sin." "Did the miracles work?" Elijah asked. The table fell quiet for a long moment. The old one, the one who hadn't said much yet, finally spoke. "They work. They shine like all get out. People walk who shouldn't. Tumors disappear and crops bloom in ash." He looked up then, and his eyes were hollow. "But it don't last." Elijah narrowed his gaze slightly. "I had a daughter, named Eloise. Got the sickness bad. Lungs were blackening. Couldn't walk. I carried her to the pulpit myself. Michael laid hands on her. Light came. Her skin glowed and she laughed. First laugh I'd heard in months. She walked for 5 days, and then on the 6th, she started coughing again. On the 7th, her lungs didn't give out. They filled, like she was drowning from the inside. She died screaming and no one came." The silence around the table was a different kind now. "Michael didn't see her?" Elijah asked. The man shook his head. "He didn't even remember her name." The bald one leaned in. "They don't forget just the miracles. They forget people. The ones who die, it's like they never existed. Records go missing. Graves vanish. Folks don't talk about them. Like they were never here." "That's the part that scares me. Not the light, not the monster, the forgetting." Elijah's hand drifted slightly toward the edge of his coat. The ring pulsed, faint but steady. "You said monster," Elijah said. The man nodded slowly. "Not many have seen it. But those that have don't last long. Sometimes it's in the woods. Sometimes near the chapel when no one's there." "What does it look like?" The bald man drained his drink. "Like something trying to wear heaven's face." The fire popped behind them. No one flinched. Elijah let the silence stretch. He knew not to crowd it. He glanced down at the ring on his hand. The obsidian shimmered faintly. inner script pulsing like breath. Not burning, not yet, but no longer still. "You seen this messenger?" Elijah asked, eyes still on the table. The tall man shook his head. "Not clearly. Some have and some haven't." "I saw it once," the old man muttered. "At night. Not directly, just shadows. Too many arms. The light bent wrong about it. Hurt to look too long." Elijah looked at him. "You ever tell anyone?" The old man smiled, not with warmth, with something bitter and rotted. "Told the priest, told the choir, told my neighbor." He took a long drink. "They all forgot." Elijah blinked once. "What do you mean?" "I mean, next day they didn't remember the story or me telling it. Sometimes didn't remember I'd been there. Others thought my daughter died years ago, not days. Something's eating memory in this town, not just people, but the pieces of them." He wiped his mouth with a shaky hand. "I only remember it because I wrote it down." He tapped his chest. "Paper's sewn in my coat. I don't read it unless I have to." The bald one grunted. "You're saying too much." No, we waited too long. Someone needs to burn it all down. I have a theory. Those who have seen its true form in any way aren't under its power the way the others are. If you've given yourself over to and believe in it, it can change your mind and memory." The bearded man looked hard at Elijah. "Are you here to burn it?" Elijah didn't answer. The man leaned back, arms crossed. "If you are, you better be good at it. Flame here don't act normal. You strike a match in the wrong place, you might light up your own name and not remember you had one." Another beat of silence. The tall one tilted his head slightly. "You ain't a preacher, you ain't a zealot, but you got the look of someone with God's ear." Elijah didn't smile, didn't move. "I ain't got his ear," he said quietly. "I've been given his job." The bearded man's mouth twitched at the corners. Not quite a smile, but close. "Well, then you better start soon." "Why's that?" The old man lowered his voice. "Because the next miracle's tomorrow. And the more of them he does, the more people disappear." Elijah drained the last of his drink in one motion and set the tin cup down with a dull thud. The men said nothing else. There was nothing else to say. He pushed the chair back and stood. No farewells, no nods. Just a look, flat and full of understanding. Elijah dropped a silver coin on the table. On one side was a burning bush. The other, a man crucified wearing a crown of thorns. And with that he turned and walked away. The rest of the inn was still in its own orbit. A woman whispered at the bar. A man coughed into a napkin and looked at the blood like it owed him an apology. A pair of younger men sat at a shadowed table, hands clasped in prayer, but their lips didn't move. Elijah moved up the stairs, each step groaning under his boots. He walked the hall with one hand resting on the chain in his belt, passing doors marked with fading numbers, each closed tight. His room was small, bare walls, low rafters, a bed that looked like it would groan under the weight of memory alone, a basin in the corner and a single cracked window. The floor was uneven, boards loose in places. He stepped over them without thinking. He always found the soft spots first. He took off his coat and hung it over the back of the single chair. Then he unstrapped the scourge Bible from beneath it and laid it on the table. Ash smudged the corners of the pages like it had survived 100 fires. And maybe it had. He opened it. The pages didn't move. No flipping, no wind, no message. Just the silence between what was and what would be. He stared at the blank space at the bottom of one page, just wide enough to write another name. But he didn't. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, hand at his mouth. The ring pulsed gently, a dull heat like coal under his skin. It wasn't warning him yet, but it was watching. He looked out the window. Across the street, the chapel's steeple rose into the black sky. No light flickered behind the stained glass, but something burned faintly there. Something not fire and not warmth. He'd seen enough to understand one thing for certain. The people of New Galilee weren't worshiping a man. They were belonging to something else, and it was hungry. Elijah closed his eyes to get what rest he could. The sky hadn't changed by the time Elijah rose from the edge of the bed. Just that same faint glow behind the chapel tower, like the moon had tried to burn through the clouds and failed. He hadn't slept, not really. Sleep never came easy anymore, and when it did, it didn't stay long. There was no peace in dreaming. Not for men like him. He buckled his coat, checked the cinch on the scourge Bible at his back, and tightened the strap holding the fingerbone of St. Merciful across his chest. Everything was already in place. The ring on his finger was warm again, still subtle but more insistent now, like a low voice humming through bone. It never told him where to go, just when it was time to move. And it was time. He left the inn before the sun breached the rooftops. New Galilee still slept, or pretended to. The streets were cold, too clean, every door shut. Smoke rose from chimneys, but no one spoke. No dogs barked, no children stirred. He found Luther tethered beneath the awning beside the well, waiting exactly as he left him. Elijah ran a hand along the horse's neck, slow, calm, then mounted and turned east, away from the chapel, toward the edge of town and whatever was pulling the ring like a hook under skin. The farther he rode, the more the light bent wrong. By the time the sun began to bleed over the hills, he had found it. A place beyond the farms, tucked in behind a line of broken irrigation troughs and rusted-out water tanks. There was a collapsed windmill nearby, half swallowed by brush, the metal creaking just barely in the breeze. And there, just beyond it, sat the pit. He slowed Luther, dismounted without a word, and tied the reins to a crooked post. The wind had shifted. He could smell it now. Not rot in the usual sense. Not death with meat still clinging to it. This was something else. Something sour. Like a promise that had gone to seed. The pit wasn't fresh, but it wasn't completely forgotten. It had been dug quick, wide, ragged. A spade's worth, not a shovel. The dirt tossed carelessly aside, sun-hardened and dark. And in the center of it, a body. Her body was twisted, limbs bent in unnatural angles, dress half-shredded and stained across the back and thighs. Her hands were curled inward like she died clutching something she couldn't hold. Her eyes were open, glazed, mouth slightly parted, teeth broken. Elijah didn't flinch. He crouched at the edge of the pit and looked without blinking. She'd been dumped. Not buried, not blessed, not mourned. Discarded. And the worst part wasn't the death. It was how clear it was that no one had meant to come back for her. He scanned the dirt around the edges. Shallow ruts, half-covered mounds. One here, another farther back. This wasn't the first pit. He stood slowly, eyes still on the woman's face. The ring on his finger flared briefly. hot enough to make him flex his hand. It passed just as quickly. Then he saw it, half pinned beneath a stone not far from her foot. A page. He stepped into the pit, knelt, and pulled it loose. Parchment, thicker than anything printed. Nowhere fresh ink. Handwritten scripture, not from the Bible, but labeled the Gospel of Flame. Chapter 11. Cast out the body. The soul has already risen. He stared at the words until the corners of the page started to curl in the heat of his hand. Then he folded it once, twice, and slid it into the back of the scourged Bible. The sky above him was cloudless, empty. Not even the vultures circled. He looked back at the woman. No one had carved a name, no marker, no verse. No one had prayed. Not even Saint Michael. He went back to the saddlebags and pulled out his entrenching tool. The blade still held a black spot from the blood he hadn't managed to wash out. Then he knelt beside the pit and started to dig. The ground was dry, stubborn, and full of stone. He dug anyway. The motion was steady, quiet, meditative. This wasn't penance, it wasn't mercy. It was respect. He laid the woman gently in the hole, straightened her arms as best he could, and covered her in silence. No prayers, no false light. Just soil and gravity. When it was done, he pressed the shovel into the ground, leaned against it, and closed his eyes. No wind, no whisper, but the ring stayed warm, and that was enough. He turned back toward town, and the chapel waited for him, its tower rising black against the growing light. The walk back into town felt longer. The sun had fully risen now, casting clean gold across whitewashed walls and red dust roads. Birds chirped from rooftops, and children played quietly in tidy rows outside a schoolhouse. A woman passed by Elijah carrying a basket of loaves, smiling gently, lips moving in silent prayer. From the outside, it looked like peace, but it didn't feel like it. Elijah moved slow, dust clinging to his boots and the sleeves of his coat. The earth beneath his nails was still fresh from the burial, and his knuckles ached from the shovel. His hands were dry and calloused, not for holding books. Which was why it stopped him cold when he saw the boy, 8, maybe 9, sitting cross-legged near a brick painter in the middle of the street, Gospel of Flame in his lap. His lips moved as he read softly to himself, finger under the words, following the line. His brow furrowed like he understood every word. Elijah slowed. The boy didn't look up. He passed 3 more readers in the space of a block. 2 women outside a bakery, reading together from a shared copy. A man sitting on a stoop, muttering the verses under his breath. A girl writing passages in chalk on a wooden board nailed to the side of a well. It struck Elijah harder than the miracle had. The sundering had collapsed everything. Governments, banks, cities. But more than that, it had wiped out literacy. After the fires fell and the sky broke, books stopped being read and started being burned. For heat, for hatred, for fear. The only ones who still read were the ones who ruled. The cults, the scholars holed up in mountain monasteries, some preachers, and fewer prophets. And even those were dying out. But here, everyone read. They didn't just revere the text, they devoured it. Elijah and Luther passed a mural being painted in the alley between 2 buildings. A man in white with the hands of gold raising a blind woman from her knees. She wept light. Words floated from his mouth, painted midair in brilliant looping calligraphy. The painter looked back at Elijah and nodded like he'd known him all his life. Elijah didn't return it. He walked to the square. A booth had been set up beneath a silk draped canopy, manned by a younger man with blonde hair and an earnest smile. He wore linen robes, a ring of copper with a carved flame on it, and a pendant that pulsed faintly against his chest. Not with magic, but with some kind of rhythm. Scripture hummed from a speaker beside him, recited in a voice too smooth to be human. "Elijah Mandrake," the man said before Elijah even spoke. Elijah paused. The man laughed, not mocking. "You're not hard to spot. Your reputation precedes you." He held out a bound tome, thick, clean, black leather pressed and oiled. "A gift. The Gospel of Flame. It's growing, but this version is nearly complete." Elijah didn't take it. "What's it say?" The man smiled. "Only the truth. The one God meant to give us after we were ready." "Which God?" "The one that brings light, not judgment." Elijah took the book. The moment it touched him, the ring burned with a white-hot intensity. It was heavier than it looked. He stepped back from the table, flipping through the first few pages. The lettering was hand-done, painstaking. Each chapter opened with ornate gold leaf verse, luminous and elegant. It looked like scripture and it read like song. But it wasn't. There was no mention of wrath, of sin, no warning. Sacrifice had been replaced by devotion. Sin had been replaced by distance. God was named only once, as the first flame. Everything else referred to the messenger. And then he scanned to the last chapter. Blank. A note was written at the bottom in a soft, flowing hand. "The gospel is alive. It writes itself through us." Elijah's jaw clenched. He closed the book and slipped it into his coat. Then he stepped away from the booth, walking back toward the edge of town, past a group of children reciting stanzas from memory. "We are not fallen, we are chosen. We are not broken, we are fire." The ring of flame seared briefly against his finger, a hot snap, sharp enough to make his knuckle twitch. Not a warning, an accusation. And still the scourged Bible stayed closed. Too deep, too cloaked. Whatever this power was, it had learned how to hide inside the folds of light. For now. Elijah didn't speak, didn't pray. He walked until the scripture faded behind him, and only the wind remembered his name. He found Luther, and the two of them left the town. What had to be done next had to be done in solitude. Elijah had chosen this place well. A low ridge cut into the earth like the hollow of a forgotten scar. The hills around him were bare. Nothing but red clay, wind-bitten brush and stone. The sky stretched wide, pale and merciless. He had pitched his canvas lean-to by noon on the first day. No fire, no horse tethered nearby. Luther had been sent off into the hills to graze on what little the earth offered. This was work Elijah did alone, and it had to be done in silence. The ring on his hand had stopped burning. Now it simply pulsed, a steady metronomic throb like a heartbeat not his own. It meant he was in the right place, the right moment, the hour of pain. He spread his tools on a flat stone like a priest preparing the altar. A shallow copper bowl, a piece of raw parchment torn from the scourged Bible's back pages, the sacrificial kind, meant to be used and meant to burn. A silver awl, a narrow coil of the chain of Golgotha, blackened from the last ritual, sacred oil, and a single, unshaped bullet casing. He sat cross-legged before the altar, drew a blade across his palm without ceremony. Blood filled the bowl, dark, quiet, no flinch, no prayer. He mixed in a spoon of scripture ash, a drop of oil, and let the parchment soak, When night came, he did not sleep. He laid flat in the dirt, watching the stars, eyes unblinking, and they whispered in his bones. The second day hurt before it began. Elijah's stomach clawed at itself. His mouth was dry. Flames danced at the edges of his vision, but none dared land. He unrolled the final tool from its oilskin wrap. A flagellum. Short leather grip. Dozens of tasseled cords, some tipped in lead pellets, others fixed with bone shards, wire curls, even a rusted nail. It was ceremonial. It was punishment. It was to reflect Christ's pain and sacrifice. Every inch of it had purpose. He rose from the ground slowly, bones stiff and spine aching. The ritual wasn't complete until the pain had been carved into his flesh. The binding bullet didn't accept theory. It demanded blood. Not just shed, but offered. He stripped his shirt and coat, bearing his back to the dry wind. The flesh there was already scored from old work. Faded stripes, punctured scars, marks like scripture burned by lash. The new ones would need to be deeper. He gripped the handle, took one breath, and struck. The first lash landed across his shoulder blades with a sickening wet slap. The ball bearings hit like stones. The bone fragments ripped. Blood welled immediately. Skin split. Elijah didn't cry out. The second blow landed lower, then the third. He adjusted his angle, changed his stance, moved with the rhythm of the chain in his belt, whispering scripture between clenched teeth. By the 10th lash, blood ran freely. By the 20th, it ran down his ribs and soaked into the waistband of his trousers. Every strike was deliberate, measured. The whip bit into him with the memory of every death he'd ever delivered, every judgment he'd ever carried, every time he'd written in the margins of the Bible. He didn't do it for redemption. He did it because holiness has a price. At 30, he staggered. His vision doubled. His hands trembled, but he didn't stop. He swung again, and again, and again, until 40 lashes had kissed his back in red fury, until the pain burned into something clean, holy, not absence of pain, but acceptance. He dropped the whip, fell forward, hands catching in the dirt. The wind blew across his back, cooling the blood. The cuts pulsed with his heartbeat, fresh and hot. Every breath was fire, and still he prayed. Not aloud, just in the meat of his thoughts. God didn't need to hear him. He needed to be heard. When Elijah stood again, the sun had begun to dip. He took the bullet casing, now dried from its soak in the blood-oil-ash mixture, and placed it into the coil of the chain. He drew the saw blade and carved a single word into the shell of the silver awl. Bind. The letters were jagged and uneven, not beautiful, just true. He wrapped the parchment around the casing, tied it shut with a sliver of chain, pressed it to the still bleeding meat of his back. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out the scourge Bible. It flipped, not by his hand. Pages turned too fast, stopping near the middle. There, in the white margin of the right page, new ink bled through like it had always been there. This is not the end, but it is the answer. Elijah nodded once, wrapped the bullet casing in cloth, and the ring on his finger cooled just for a moment, just long enough to let him breathe. Elijah slept, and when he woke up, the wind had picked up by dawn. Not enough to lift the dust, but just enough to move it. A slow crawl across the valley floor, like even the earth itself didn't want to stay still anymore. Elijah sat with his back against a sun-bleached boulder, eyes half closed, his coat draped across his shoulders like a shroud. He hadn't slept much, not since the lashes, not since the fire in his spine cooled and left that low, humming pain he could still feel behind his teeth. The binding bullet sat in a cloth bundle in front of him, untouched since the moment he'd finished it. He hadn't loaded it into Saintbreaker yet. Not because he feared it wouldn't work, but because he feared what it meant if he might need it. A bird croaked overhead. Not a crow, not a scavenger, but something smaller. Thin bone, still alive somehow. It perched on a rock across from him, cocked its head once, and flew off without a sound. Elijah watched it go. His hand brushed over the ring of flame. He looked toward the horizon. From this angle, the chapel of New Galilee looked like a tooth growing sideways out of the land, wrong and out of place. A thorn carved from white stone, the banner at its peak, golden flame on black cloth, fluttered faintly in the wind, though no other wind had touched the valley. He exhaled slow. "You ever think?" he said, not sure if he meant it for God or himself. "Then maybe this place ain't fixable." The ring didn't answer. It never did, not directly. He closed his eyes, tried to remember the last time he had rest that wasn't just quiet, and tried to remember the sound of his own voice when it wasn't giving warnings or delivering judgment. Tried to remember the name of the last person he saved who hadn't needed saving a week later. Nothing came. Just the image of the woman in the pit, the boy with the broken legs, the crowd that screamed joy over lies. He looked down at his hands, one still raw from flagellation, one steady on his knee. "You see it all," he whispered to the sky. "So you already know what I'll do." The Bible at his back pressed against him like a second spine. He reached into his coat, pulled Saintbreaker, opened the cylinder, and slid the binding bullet into the chamber with a soft click. It settled like it belonged there. Elijah stood, let the dust fall from his coat, adjusted the Bible strap, brushed the blood off his collar with a slow, tired hand. He didn't look back. He whistled long and hard, and Luther came trotting out from the plains. With all of his equipment and gear packed up, he made his way back to the town of New Galilee. The wind followed as he began to walk into town. The bells were already ringing when Elijah returned to New Galilee. Not to the sound of iron and dust, but something cleaner and clearer. Glass chimes, delicate and tuned to a near-perfect harmony, rang out across the white stone towers and banner-lined alleys of the town. They didn't call to prayer. They beckoned. Like music from a dream you didn't want to wake from. The crowd had gathered by the hundreds. More than he remembered. He moved through them slowly, boots grinding against the polished stone, dust still clinging to the hem of his coat. His shoulder ached. His back throbbed beneath his shirt, lashes fresh and raw reopened with every step. The binding bullet sat cold on his belt, chambered and waiting in Saintbreaker. He didn't speak, didn't draw looks. The crowd had no room for outsiders. They were already inside something together. Saint Michael stood at the center of it all, atop a high, circular platform at the center of the square. Oak pillars and silk banners framed him from behind, golden cloth fluttering with every breath of wind. His robes were radiant, not white, but something cleaner than white, like light filtered through gold leaf. His arms were raised and his head bowed as if listening. Then he lifted his chin and opened his eyes, and the sermon began. Brothers, sisters, children of the new covenant. His voice carried over the crowd like sunlight through fog. You have come far. You have suffered long. The world broke around us, didn't it? The crowd murmured agreement. Heads nodded. Some already wept. The skies fell. The fire came. Cities turned to ash. The old words grew brittle and the old laws snapped like bones in the heat. We asked where he had gone. We asked why he was silent. Michael's voice rose strong and clear. But I tell you now, he was never gone. Cheers rose up, rolling like thunder. Michael didn't pause. He fed off of it. He waited for us. He waited for the world to die so we could be made new. And here now today, we are no longer survivors. He held both arms out to the crowd. We are not sinners clinging to forgiveness. We are the light reborn. The crowd erupted. Elijah stood still near the edge of the square, watching the faces. Some people stood on crates and barrels to see better. Others lifted children to their shoulders. Tears streaked down cheeks. Hands reached skyward. The names of angels were whispered. Michael smiled, letting the noise swell and fall. And I say this to you not as a prophet, but as a witness, because I have seen him. The crowd leaned in, every soul silent, held. I have seen the messenger, he said, reverent now, his voice soft. I have heard the voice of the first flame. I have been shown a new covenant. Not one of law, not one of punishment, but a promise. He stepped slowly across the platform. The light hit him just so. The crowd gasped. There is no wrath in the flame. There is no judgment in God. There is no need for blood, only belief. Elijah's eyes narrowed. Michael stopped, facing the crowd again. And to those who still carry the chains of guilt, hear this. You are already clean. You were never broken. There is no sin in you, only silence. And he has come to fill it. A woman near the front collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Two others caught her in their arms. They didn't pray. They just held her, nodding, as if this was the only truth that had ever mattered. Michael raised one hand. The world that was, it shackled you with shame. It made you kneel, but here... He opened both arms. You stand in the flame and in the light and in truth. The crowd cried out. Some clapped. Others just shouted praise. Not to God, not to Christ, but to Michael. Saint Michael, the mouth of the messenger. The ring on Elijah's hand burned hotter than it had since the chapel in Asheville. Not enough to blister, but enough to whisper now. But Elijah didn't move. Not yet. He waited. Michael turned again, pacing slow across the dais, hands behind his back like a teacher among students. I know some of you doubt. Some of you wonder how this could be real, how the fire that fell can be holy, how miracles can be made without sacrifice, and how the flame can speak without scripture. He stopped, looked out over the crowd. I will show you. The crowd hushed. I will walk the word. I will place my life in his hands as he placed the world in mine. And then he walked to the edge of the platform. There was no fanfare, no dramatic chant, just belief. So strong, so pure, it felt like gravity itself would break for it. Michael looked up toward the sky, and then, without a word, he leapt. He should have fallen, but he didn't. He floated. Just above the edge of the platform, arms spread, robes fluttering like banners in a wind no one felt. The air shimmered around him, gold and brilliant and impossible. He hovered. The crowd screamed. Ecstasy erupted in waves. People clutched each other, sobbing and shouting. A boy fainted. A man in his 60s tore off his shirt and dropped to the ground, pressing his forehead to the stone. Michael rose higher. 5 feet. 10. His face was peaceful and serene, like the miracle was effortless. He opened his mouth and one verse rang out. He will command his angels concerning you. They will lift you up so you will not strike your foot against a stone. He hovered there, arms wide, robes billowing in a slow circle as if caught in celestial wind. Light pulsed around him like a veil, soft, warm, gold so rich it looked alive. And then it appeared. To the crowd it was an angel, beautiful beyond imagining. It descended behind Michael like it had always been there, folding out of the light with wings wide as the sky. 6 of them, radiant and feathered, not white but opalescent, shimmering with colors the eye couldn't name. Its face was featureless but holy, a mask of perfect symmetry, glowing with mercy. Its hands were enormous, cupped beneath St. Michael's arms, holding him aloft like a father would hold a newborn child. The people gasped, and then they wept. A child pointed skyward, crying out in joy. A woman screamed a praise psalm in a tongue Elijah hadn't heard spoken in years. Dozens dropped to their knees. Men and women alike sobbed openly. Some passed out from the sheer force of what they were seeing. The angel didn't speak. It just was. A perfect expression of divine love. This, the crowd believed, was God's messenger. Not just helping Michael. Anointing him. Sanctifying him. Their saint, their light, their new covenant. And that was when the world shifted. Elijah felt the ring ignite. The air warped. The shimmer broke. And for a moment, a single breathless second, he saw the truth. There was something holding Michael aloft, all right. But it wasn't an angel. It was a thing. Vast, winged, coiled in shadow and light like oil spilled across fire. Its wings were studded with mouths. Its arms were wrong. Too many joints, too much bone. Its face looked almost human. Almost. But it smiled with teeth that went too deep, and its eyes were wells with voices inside. It looked directly at Elijah, and it spoke. Not aloud, but in the marrow of his bones. You know me. Elijah didn't answer. He couldn't. He stood there, staring into the face of a false god, while the crowd wept and cheered for salvation. The thing knew it had been seen, and it didn't run. It reveled in it. When the illusion snapped back, the crowd saw nothing but a man glowing in sunlight, floating like a divine promise made flesh. Elijah turned without a word and walked away. He would return soon, and when he did, it would not be as a witness, but as an executioner. The sky was low and pale when Elijah returned to his camp. A dull sheet of overcast light had swallowed the sun, softening the horizon into ash and amber. The wind dragged itself through the brush without urgency, kicking up dust in half-hearted spirals. It was the kind of evening that didn't end. It just faded. Luther stood there tethered to a split post, jaw working on dry grass. His tail flicked lazily at the occasional fly, and his ears perked only when Elijah dropped his gear beside the fire pit. "I saw it," Elijah said, not looking at the horse. Luther blinked once, chewed and said nothing. Elijah crouched beside his saddlebag, digging out a dry cloth to clean the edge of the saw blade. He didn't need to. It wasn't bloodied, but it gave his hand something to do while his mind unspooled. I saw it. I really saw it. Not just the floating trick. Not the false angel, but the thing behind it. The cloth moved in slow circles across the blade's spine. Luther snorted, shifting weight from one leg to the other. Elijah paused, then chuckled dryly. "Yeah, you're right. Should have expected that. Always something behind the shine." He set the blade down, leaned his elbows on his knees, and stared into the dead fire pit. "I don't think Michael knows." Luther turned his head slightly, one ear flicking back toward him. "I mean it. The preacher preaches a false gospel, sure. Preaches it loud and pretty, like he was born with a silver cross between his teeth. But he believes it. I saw it in his eyes. He ain't lying. He's convinced." A pause. Elijah drew the scourge Bible from his coat and thumbed the edge of the pages. "He's a mouthpiece, not a monster." Luther huffed once and dust kicked at his hooves. I ain't saying I'll let him walk. If God asks for blood, I'll give it. You know that. I ain't never failed to call. But..." He trailed off, jaw tightening. "But sometimes I wish the bastards knew what they were doing. It's easier when they know." The horse said nothing. The wind died completely and the valley went quiet. Elijah sighed and leaned back against the post, drawing his coat tighter around him. He kept the Bible close, pressed against his chest like a shield. Saint Breaker rested across his lap. He closed one eye against the creeping dusk, his back silently screaming in pain. "If you see anything slithering around tonight, wake me." Luther didn't even blink. Elijah dreamt of light, not flame, not the white-hot purity he'd come to know in divine moments, but a soft golden warmth, like sunlight filtered through the memory of childhood. He was lying in the field outside his old home. Wind in the heat, his mother's voice, faint and sweet, humming a hymn he hadn't heard in decades. He felt small again, unscarred, his back unbroken, no weight on his hips, no ring burning his hand. He sat up. Someone was sitting at the edge of the firelight. Not a stranger, a boy, him. Maybe 10, dust on his face, a slingshot in one hand, a torn Bible in the other. The boy looked at him, head tilted. eyes full of something too deep for his age. "You're tired," the boy said. Elijah didn't move. "I've been tired." "You've done enough." He didn't answer. "You've carried this longer than anyone was meant to. You've bled, you've watched, you've obeyed. Isn't that enough?" Elijah swallowed. The wind in the dream had stopped. The wheat was still. Too still. "You can rest now. Let me carry it." Elijah's fingers closed around the Bible. "You're not me." The boy smiled, soft and patient. "I could be. I could be anything you want. An angel, a son. The sound of your name spoken without fear." "You're wearing skin that ain't yours," Elijah replied. "I'm offering peace." "You're offering escape." The firelight dimmed. The boy, the thing in his shape, stood slowly. Who Elijah came to know was the messenger. "You don't have to suffer." Elijah's voice was low. "But I do." The wind picked up, not in the world, but in the Bible. Pages flipped, once, twice, then stopped. A verse bled into the margin. Black script, no author, no origin. "The ones who speak comfort in the dark are not always sent by the light." The boy hissed. Or maybe the voice beneath the boy did. The illusion cracked. The shape twisted. Eyes too many. Mouths unfolding from beneath skin. Wings forming not feathers, but scripture and smoke. But it was too late. The light from the Bible flared. Silent. Final. The demon vanished without a sound. Elijah woke with a gasp, hand already gripping Saintbreaker. The fire pit was cold. The valley was empty. But the ring was glowing red against his skin. He breathed once, twice, then looked down at the revolver in his lap. He popped the cylinder. The binding bullet waited. He slid it back in. The time was close. The lie was nearly done. And he was ready. The road into New Galilee hadn't changed. The white stones gleamed underfoot, swept clean with cultic precision. The banners fluttered from tall wooden spires. Black cloth stitched with gold flames that caught the wind like scripture in motion. The people were already gathering when Elijah crested the rise. He could hear them from a mile out, singing, chanting, shouting praises in the strange rhythmic cadence of the gospel of flame. He rode in slow. Luther's hooves clopped quietly against the paving stones, each step echoing too cleanly in the street. Elijah's coat was dust-streaked and soaked dark at the seams. His back ached from the lashes. The weight of the scourged Bible pressed like a second spine beneath his coat. The ring burned warm against his hand, not as a warning now, but as a brand, a signal. He dismounted without a word. Luther shifted beside him, restless, but not nervous. Elijah reached up and stroked the animal's neck once. "Won't be long," he muttered. Luther blinked, swished his tail, neighed low and brief. Elijah tied him off at the stables, adjusted the chain in his belt, and turned toward the square. The sound of the crowd grew louder with every step, like 1,000 hearts beating in unison, fueled not by blood, but by faith. The square was a white bowl of sun and noise. People pressed shoulder to shoulder, bodies packed tight against the heat, swaying with each step of the sermon's promise. Banners whipped above the chapel tower, casting flickers of shadow over the assembled faithful. Children in white stood along the edges of the raised platform like sentinels of innocence. Their hands were clasped, their eyes were wide. They didn't blink. The choir's song roared high and trembling, 1,000 voices crescendo that didn't rise. It rolled like thunder given structure. Elijah pushed his way through the fringe of the crowd. No one stopped him. No one even looked. They were beyond earthly things now. Their minds floated somewhere above their bodies, eyes fixed on the elevated stage at the center. Saint Michael stood at his peak, robed in white so bright it seemed unnatural, trimmed in gold that shimmered like something molten. His hair was clean, his beard full, and his smile beatific, a vision of holy fire given flesh. He stood beneath a woven canopy, arms open wide, palms exposed to the crowd like a crucifix come alive. "Brothers," he called, and the word struck like thunder. "Sisters." He took one step forward, then another, and then another. His voice carried effortlessly across the heads of the crowd, neither shouted nor strained, simply present. "Today is another day." The crowd fell silent. He smiled, full of peace. "Today is not more waiting, not more hunger, not more darkness." He raised a hand to the rising sun behind him, letting it cast long shadows across his face. "Today is the day of fulfillment. Today is the day the word completes itself. Not in ink, not in stone, not in distant memory, but in you." The crowd erupted. Voices lifted like wings. People wept openly. A woman screamed and fell to her knees. A man behind her laughed and beat his chest with both fists. The choir took the wave of praise and gave it form. Their song rose like the lifting of a temple roof, ancient and new at once. Elijah stood still among it all. He didn't blink. He just watched. Saint Michael raised his other hand now, arms spread wide as the wind blew through his robes, making the golden fabric dance like fire. "The old ways bound you. They shackled you in guilt. They burned your names into the book of judgment." He stepped forward, voice rising. "But the flame has spoken again. The messenger has come. The gospel is not finished. It is being written." He lifted his head to the sky. "And now, beloved, it writes itself in you." The crowd erupted. People fell to their knees, the choir sang louder. And Elijah stepped forward, quietly through the heart of it all, while the heat behind his ribs began to burn again. Saint Michael turned slowly, hands still raised, his voice softening now, like a shepherd soothing a trembling flock. "There are some still among you who fear, some who ache, some who carry broken flesh." The crowd grew quiet again. The choir dimmed to a low, humming chord. The air itself seemed to pause, expectant. Michael turned to one side of the platform and gestured. 2 attendants emerged from the crowd. One led a boy, no more than 10, small and fragile, his legs withered and bent like straw under cloth. His eyes were wide with wonder. He was silent, not afraid, but watching. The other brought a man, older, wrapped in gray robes stained from years of quiet suffering. His skin was raw, pitted, a leper's marks clear even from a distance. He moved slowly, humbly, leaning on a carved staff. The crowd made room. A reverent hush fell. "These 2," Michael said, turning to them with open arms, "are beloved." He knelt beside the boy and touched his cheek. "They are not cursed, they are not punished. They are simply waiting for the flame to find them." He stood, spreading his arms wide again. And today, beloved, it finds them. He lifted his face to the sky. The crowd followed. Above the chapel tower, the clouds parted. Not with thunder, not with violence, but with silence, as though the very sky had been peeled back to reveal something beyond weather and beyond reason. A shaft of golden light poured down, slow and perfect, and from it descended the messenger. It came with no sound but song, a single crystalline tone that rang in the chest like breath held too long. It wasn't winged, not at first, but wreathed in something that suggested wings. Curves of light, feathered shadows, limbs that shimmered in and out of vision. Then it became clearer, a shape of gold and white, tall and symmetrical, 4 wings unfurling like petals from a divine blossom. Its hands glowed with pure radiance. Its face was smooth and featureless, save for a mouth that did not move. It was different every time it showed itself. It smiled not with lips, but with presence. People gasped. Some people screamed and some fainted. A man knelt and pressed his forehead to the stone. Children wept without knowing why. The messenger hovered just above the dais, lowering its hands over the heads of the boy and the leper. Saint Michael stepped back, head bowed. By the will of the flame, be whole, Saint Michael whispered. The angel's hands pulsed with light. The boy cried out, not in pain but shock. His legs shifted beneath him. The bones cracked, straightened, took shape. Flesh knit. Muscle filled the hollow places. The leper dropped his staff. His skin shimmered, the sores sealing like wax over flame. He fell to his knees and stared at his own hands as if he'd never seen them before. The crowd erupted again. Praise like a wave, voices breaking with joy. Someone began to sing. Someone else screamed, "A sign! A sign!" and tore the gospel aflame from his breast pocket, waving it like a banner. And Elijah couldn't move. The ring on his finger turned white hot. Not warm, not burning, but it seared. His breath caught. His skin blistered beneath it, but he didn't cry out. He looked up and saw not an angel, but a thing that wore light like a mask. The scourged Bible at his back moved on his own, pages turning, not wildly but with intent, like a hand was guiding it. Elijah reached for it, unstrapped it and opened it. The pages had stopped near the middle, but the margin was still writing, ink spilling slowly into the old paper like a wound opening. Name the liar. Break the veil. He looked up at the thing above the dais. The golden light was no longer golden. He saw fire. Not flame, not holy, but burning pressure, the kind that melts truth, the kind that twists miracles into meat. The boy's legs trembled, not from strength, but from shock. His eyes were wide, but they were not joyful. The leopard stared down at his hands, confused, and the messenger's smile split just a little too wide, a hair too long. A shadow stretched from its wing, but no sun was behind it. Elijah stepped forward. The crowd didn't stop him. He raised his voice, not shouting, not screaming, but loud enough to carry through the madness. You call it an angel. Heads turned. You see healing. You see gold, you see peace. Michael turned sharply, confused. You see what it wants you to see, Elijah said. The ring seared. He raised the Bible. The name was there, spelled in black, unbroken letters across the holy page. A word not of heaven, but from the pit. And Elijah shouted it. The demon's true name. The name split the air like a sword dragged through iron. The moment it left Elijah's lips, the wind died. The choir fell silent mid-verse. A scream began in someone's throat and never made it out. The messenger froze in place, wings paused mid-beat, light flickering unnaturally across his skin. Then the light broke. Not like glass, not like fire, but like a lie unraveling. The golden veil peeled back in silence. The radiance thinned, twisted, and darkened, until there was nothing left of heaven, and in its place stood a shape that did not belong to any gospel. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by sobs, then silence. The messenger was no angel. It was 8 feet tall, shoulders wide enough to block the light behind it. Its muscles strained beneath cracked leathery skin, burnt and broken, as if it had crawled out from beneath 1,000 suns. From every fissure in the flesh, flames spurted like backdraft, hissing and pulsing with every breath. The air shimmered around its body, warped with heat. 4 massive wings spread wide from its back, ragged and torn, tipped in bone and shivering with black fire. They didn't flap. They unfurled like something waking from a long sleep, slow and deliberate. Its eyes, reptilian, slitted and golden, locked on to Elijah. Not angry, not afraid, but amused. Below those eyes stretched a thick jaw of uneven fangs, half grinning, half grinding. Black smoke poured from its nostrils in slow, steady gusts. Its arms, 4 of them, shifted into view. 2 moved with predatory grace, the claws twitching in anticipation. One hand was missing a finger, the stump smoldering faintly like it had never stopped burning. The other 2 hung low, dragging claws across the stone dais as if marking it for ownership. Across its back rose a spinal ridge of jagged glowing spikes, each one pulsing red at the tips, glowing like hot coals beaten into bone. Its legs were thick, jointed backward, ending in taloned feet that never quite touched the ground. Each step scorched the stone, and ash curled up from where it stood. And in the center of its chest, half buried in burned flesh, was a half-melted rusted crown, fused to the bone beneath. A forgotten relic of a lie once believed. It glowed faintly, like something that had long since stopped beating, but not stopped burning. The crowd did not scream all at once. First came silence, then came disbelief. Then came the sound of faith tearing open. A boy cried out. A woman fell to her knees and began to wail. A man shouted behind her, "It's a trick! It's not real!" And then collapsed with blood pouring from his nose, his eyes open too wide. Children ran. Some didn't. One old man began to laugh and never stopped. The gospel of flame, still clutched in dozens of hands, caught fire one by one. Not all at once, not like magic, but like scripture rejecting itself. A divine judgment, the ink smoking, the paper curling until black ash filled the air like pollen in spring. Saint Michael staggered backward on the platform. He stared up at the thing he had called holy, and his mouth moved soundlessly. No, this isn't the messenger. The demon didn't even turn to him. It looked only to Elijah. Saint Breaker gleamed in his hand. The ring on his finger pulsed like a second heartbeat. The demon shifted his wings, bones cracking like dead branches, and raised his upper right hand. It spoke, but not with sound. Its mouth moved, and everyone in the square heard a different voice. A lover's voice, a father's, a dead child's, a priest long buried. Elijah didn't flinch. He stepped forward, leveled the revolver, and pulled the trigger. The binding bullet screamed through the air like something alive. It struck the demon square in the chest, just beneath the rusted crown. There was no blood. There was light. A sharp silver flash that cut through the haze, followed by the shriek of iron chains snapping into places across the creature's limbs. The demon reeled, wings snapping shut, its arms locked, its jaw clenched. Chains of radiant fire wound around it, embedding themselves into the ground. The earth trembled. The people watched in awe, some still clinging to hope, others too broken to move. For a heartbeat, It looked like the thing might fall. And then the fire flared. The chains glowed white, then red, then shattered. With a roar that shook birds from the trees, the demon broke free. Flames erupted from its back. The wings exploded once again. The binding circle crumbled into slag beneath its feet. It stood tall, unmasked and unbound, but no longer hidden. And that, Elijah knew, was enough. The demon opened its jaws and the square caught fire. A roar bellowed from its throat, not a sound of language, but a blast of molten fury that tore the air in half. Flame gushed from the fissures in its chest, licking across the stone dais, and curling upward in a heat wave that made the banners overhead curl and blacken before bursting into ash. The first row of townsfolk was gone before they could scream. Charred silhouettes vaporized mid-kneel, their white robes trailing in the wind like cremation smoke. The crowd broke. Some ran and some didn't. A few stood frozen, locked in the place by the sheer wrongness of what they were seeing. Muscle and fire and wings beating hot wind across the world. The demon leapt from the dais in a single crash of bone and stone. Its wings flared wide, black fire coughing from their tips. The impact caved in the square beneath it, cratering flagstones, shattering wooden carts, and sending bodies flying. Elijah was already moving. He drew the psalm blade from its scabbard in one fluid motion and yanked the chain of Golgotha from his belt, wrapping it once around his left forearm and cinching it tight. The links rattled like old sins. He ran headlong into the fire. Heat washed over him. His coat caught along the edge, flames licking at the hem, biting into the leather like teeth. But he didn't stop, didn't slow. He slapped at the fire once with his free hand, snuffing it in motion. The coat stayed on, charred, smoking at the edges, but intact, still heavy with its burden of relics and holy weight. Beneath it, his shirt clung to the open, bleeding welts across his back. The lashes torn wide again with every movement. Every step jolted his wounds like broken glass, pain blooming down his spine in waves. He welcomed it. Pain meant he was alive. Pain meant the job wasn't done. The demon turned at the sound of his boots. It swung a claw the size of a scythe across his body. Elijah ducked low and slid beneath it, blade flashing out to slash across the back of its leg, tough like stone but not invincible. The tip bit. Blood, if it was blood, sizzled black and red from the cut. The demon reared back and brought his foot down, trying to crush him. Elijah rolled sideways, narrowly avoiding the blow. Stone cracked beneath the weight. He was already upright again, charging. He slashed at the wing joint, then ducked a swing that would have taken his head. The demon twisted, fast despite its size, claws raking toward him in a savage cross strike. Elijah parried one hand with the chain, then drove his boot into the demon's knee and launched backward before the others could reach. The wind from its wings knocked him sideways. He hit the ground hard, skidding through ash and broken stone, back screaming, shoulders searing. He gritted his teeth, spit blood, and stood again. The demon opened his mouth and howled, flame belching from between jagged fangs. Elijah moved through it. He ran under the flame, clothes smoking, skin blistering along one side. He leapt, kicked off the demon's knee again, and slashed upward across its chest, cutting through the cracked hide, striking fire-veined bone underneath. The thing roared in pain this time, real pain. It stumbled backward just a step, but that was enough. Elijah landed, crouched low, every muscle shaken. He tightened the chain around his hand, wrapped it over Psalm Blade's grip. The demon watched him, eyes blazing gold. He raised the blade and whispered low, "Let's finish this." The demon reared back, wings spread wide, fire pouring from the broken seams of its chest. It loomed above the ruins of the square like a god that had failed upward, still burning, still dangerous, but wounded. Elijah didn't give it the chance to recover. He drew Saint Breaker with a single practice motion. The revolver gleamed, barrel dark with soot, but the steel beneath still true. The demon turned, too slow. Elijah raised the gun. He fired. The first shot caught it in the left pectoral, near the binding bullet wound. A spray of flame and flesh burst from the impact, the creature staggering half a step. He fired again. The second shot right shoulder. Bone cracked like ice splitting under boot. One of its upper arms went limp, claw twitching spasmodically. He fired again. Third shot left knee. The joint collapsed. The demon dropped the full foot, listing sideways, claws scraping the ground in search of stability. He fired a fourth shot right through the wing, shattering bone and punching a ragged hole through torn flesh. A fountain of black fire spiraled upward. His fifth and final shot, right through the jaw, jerking its massive head to the side with a crack of pulverized teeth. The head snapped back, mouth open in a soulless howl of hate and confusion. The revolver clicked empty. Elijah holstered it. The demon was reeling, shuddering, smoke pouring from 5 gaping wounds. Fire leaked from the cracked bones of its chest like oil bleeding from stone. It tried to rise, but its leg wouldn't hold. Its wings spasmed and hung low. It was still alive, but it was open. Elijah ran, boots striking hot stone, blade low, chain coiled tight. The demon saw him coming and lifted one of his good arms, slow, sluggish, a killing blow too late. Elijah leapt. He planted his foot on the demon's burned thigh, driving upward, past the broken breastplate of flame and through the curtain of smoke spilling from its jaw. He brought the sawn blade high over his shoulder, both hands clenched tight on the hilt, the chain of Golgotha dragging behind him like a banner of war. And then he brought it down, clean, through muscle, through bone, through heat and fury in the engine of hell itself. The blade sang as it passed through the demon's neck, and the head tore free. The body staggered one more step, arms twitching, wings curling in like burning paper. Then it collapsed. A single deafening crash that shook the square, a shockwave of ash and heat rippling outward. The demon's head hit the ground a moment later with a wet thud, jaw still open, molten tongue flickering once before dying out. Elijah landed hard, rolled, and came up gasping blood in his mouth. The ring on his finger was cold. And at last, there was silence. The battlefield didn't go quiet. It went hollow. The square was blackened and broken, its stone cracked and glowing in places where demon blood still simmered. Buildings leaned like drunks after a funeral. The chapel roof had collapsed in on itself. Gold-threaded banners reduced to smoke and loose fabric coiled in the wind. And at the center of it all, the demon's corpse still bled heat into the earth. Its body lay crumpled, half curled like a scalded beast, headless but twitching now and again as nerves lost their final war. A few of its glowing spine spikes pulsed weakly. The detached head sat 10 feet away, jaw slacked and steaming. One slitted eye burst, the other still open and glowing faintly in the shade. No singing, no cries of joy. Only smoke. Only ruin. The people emerged slowly, from behind carts, from under pews, from homes and basements and crawl spaces. Some came crawling. Others stumbled. Most didn't speak. A few wept, quiet, as if afraid to draw attention. Some looked at Elijah like he was a curse given legs. Saint Michael crawled from the wreckage of the platform, robes in shreds, blood streaking down his face. One eye was swollen shut. His hands bled from glass embedded in his palms. He stopped when he saw the body. He didn't scream, he didn't move, he just stared. The heat of the demon still hung in the air. But it wasn't fire that burned him now. It was truth. He stumbled forward, barely able to stay upright. He reached Elijah, who stood motionless, bloodied blade still in hand, and fell to his knees, hands clutching Elijah's coat like the hem of a priest's robe. "I thought it was real. I thought it was him. I didn't know." His voice broke, but he didn't stop. He bowed his head, forehead pressed to Elijah's chest. "I didn't know." Elijah didn't speak. He stood above the man, every inch of him aching. His coat smoked at the seams. Blood ran from a dozen wounds, back torn open from ritual lashes, shoulder scorched, ribs cracked, thigh cut, head bleeding. He reached slowly into the inside of his coat, drew out a small relic. Saint Michael flinched. Elijah drew out the finger bone of Saint Merciful. It was warm to the touch, already responding. In his other hand, Elijah reached out and gently touched Michael's forehead. The broken preacher flinched. "What are you doing?" Elijah's voice was low and calm. "Asking God what needs to be done with you." The relic pulsed in his hand. And then Elijah saw. Not in visions, not in dreams, just truth. Poured into his mind like oil into a wound. He saw Michael's faith. Not arrogance, not pride, but true belief. Naive, desperate, and misguided. He saw the moment the messenger first appeared, how Michael had wept, how he had felt relief so deep it shattered his doubt. He saw the truth, the praise, the absolute conviction that he was doing good. And then he saw something more. He saw Michael broken, living the rest of his life not as a preacher but as a penitent, scrubbing floors, rebuilding roofs, carrying the memory of the demon like a stone around his neck. He would not lie again. He would not lead again. He would serve. Elijah's hand fell away. He tucked the finger bone back into his coat. "God has judged you." What did he say?" "You are forgiven, but forgiveness doesn't spare you from debt." I don't feel worthy." "You're not. That's what makes it real." Michael broke. His head dropped, his shoulders trembled. He didn't try to stand, he just wept into the stone, forehead pressed to the place where Elijah's shadow fell. The crowd gathered again, cautious, unsure, eyes full of ash and question. A woman stepped forward and her hands were shaking. "What do we do now?" How do we pray?" another voice called out. Elijah looked at them, face cut, hand resting on the hilt of psalm blade. He didn't raise his voice. "Burn what's left. Bury your dead." No one spoke after that, and Elijah didn't wait for applause, didn't wait for gratitude, didn't wait for anything. Elijah turned from the crowd. Each step burned. His right side ached, ribs grinding with every breath. The demon had caught him with the back of one claw, and he'd felt the crack as clear as a rifle shot. His shoulders throbbed, half-cooked from where the fire had kissed through the coat. The cut along his thigh was deeper than he wanted to admit, warm blood soaking into the inside of his boot. But worse were his back wounds. The lashes from making the binding bullet. They had reopened in the heat of battle, torn wide beneath his shirt, sticking to the inside of his coat like fresh parchment pressed to wet ink. With every movement they screamed, and still he walked. The townsfolk parted for him in silence. Some bowed their heads, others stepped away like they feared touching him might bring the fire back. He didn't look at them. He didn't look at the chapel, or the corpse, or St. Michael still on his knees. He only looked forward. Luther was waiting at the stable post. The horse lifted his head when Elijah approached, giving a low, gruff snort, like he'd known, like he'd been listening the whole time. Elijah reached up, slow and stiff, and patted the side of Luther's neck. "Still breathing," he muttered. He mounted awkwardly, pain shooting from knee to shoulder, and settled into the saddle like a man returning to his own grave. The ring on his hand was cold. The scourged Bible at his back didn't move. He didn't need to ask what came next. He already knew. And so he rode into silence and into what waited. Whatever it was. Elijah left New Galilee under a gray, weightless sky. No townsfolk lined the streets to see him off. No hymn followed his departure. Only the sound of Luther's hooves over broken stones and ash. The slow crunch of leather creaking with each shift in Elijah's saddle. His back was torn raw beneath his coat. His ribs moved wrong. His left thigh throbbed like it had its own heartbeat. But he didn't stop. There was no place in that town for him anymore. Not in their grief, not in their rebuilding. His work was done. By the second day of riding, the pain settled into something dull and permanent. The heat of the binding bullets ritual still echoed in his spine. His shoulder ached each time he tugged the reins. Dust clung to the corners of his mouth and eyes, and blood, his own long-dried, stiffened the inside of his collar. He barely spoke on the journey. Luther didn't need direction. The beast had a better sense of purpose than most men. When the familiar shape of the settlement crested the horizon that evening, low buildings tucked into the stone, the inn's warm glow in the distance, Elijah didn't speed up. He just adjusted the weight of the scourged Bible against his back and kept riding. The inn looked the same. Same crooked sign above the door. Same stink of stale beer, old sweat, and cheap perfume bleeding through the walls. Inside, the crowd had shifted but not changed. Hardened men hung over hunched cards. A girl laughing too loudly in the corner. Someone passed out near the hearth. Life continued in these places like rot beneath floorboards. You didn't see it unless you stopped moving. Elijah stepped inside, slow and steady. The barkeep looked up and narrowed her eyes. "You look worse than when you left." Elijah didn't answer. He walked to the counter, set down a small pouch of coin, and said just one word. "Jennifer." The barkeep glanced toward the upstairs landing, shrugged, and scooped up the coin. "Room's yours, I'll send her up." Elijah didn't nod. Just climbed the stairs with the gait of a man carrying his own headstone. The room was small. Wood-paneled, low ceiling, clean but not fresh. The smell of perfume and ash lingered like someone else's memory. Elijah lit the oil lamp on the dresser and sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't take off his coat, he just waited. A few minutes later, the door creaked open. Jennifer stepped in, softer this time. Not the sultry sway of the first encounter, more tentative. She paused when she saw him.
"You made it back."
He looked at her, eyes heavy. "Yeah."
"You want the usual?"
"No." A beat, her brow raised unsure. "I want the room for the night. Just you and me." She tilted her head slightly, a small, wry smile returning to her lips.
"Is that right?"
Elijah said nothing, just reached into his coat and placed a second coin pouch on the bedside table. He didn't look at it. Jennifer took a few steps in, slowly starting to unbutton her blouse.
"All right, sugar. Just say how you want it."
"No." She blinked.
"No."
He looked up at her. Not stern, not cold, just tired. "I don't want that tonight. I just want comfort. Quiet. A place warm to rest." Jennifer didn't say anything at first. Her hand still hovered at the open buttons. Her smile faded a little. Not insulted, just confused. Elijah began to undress instead. Slowly. Each movement labored. Elijah shrugged the coat off slowly, one shoulder at a time, careful not to tear anything open worse than it already was. The leather scraped over dried blood, stiff with salt and dust, and dropped to the floor with a heavy thump. His shirt underneath clung to him like a second skin, blood-soaked, sweat-soaked, tight with pain. He peeled it off with both hands, breath catching halfway through, the fabric tugging against the raw, crisscross lashes across his back. Dozens of them, angry and red, some still oozing beneath the scabs. His ribs were painted in bruises, ranging from deep violet to yellowed green. Across his side was a fresh gash, puckered and still swollen. Another marked his thigh, taped shut with a piece of holy gauze. Jennifer stopped moving. Her hands, which had been toying with her blouse moments before, dropped slowly to her sides.
Jesus,
she said softly. He didn't turn to look at her, just kept working the shirt off over his shoulders. She took a step forward, then another.
what the hell happened to you?
Elijah didn't answer. His eyes were on the floor. The weight of the air shifted between them. He winced when she got closer, not from the pain, but from being seen this way. She reached out, gently, her fingers grazing one of the scars on his ribs. He flinched, and her hand fell back immediately.
You let someone do this to you?
I let God. That's not the same thing. Jennifer didn't tease him, didn't make a joke. Her voice softened in a way Elijah wasn't used to hearing from anyone.
In the last town I worked,
she said, moving toward the door.
there was a fight pit under the chapel. Drunks, soldiers, people who didn't like using words. I stitched up more knife wounds than I can count.
She paused at the threshold, looking back.
I'll be right back. Don't bleed out.
She left without waiting for another answer. Elijah stood in silence, bare to the waist, staring at the wash basin like it might move. His hands hung at his sides, the ring still warm on his finger, though faint. The scourged Bible sat heavy in his coat on the floor, untouched and unopened. A few minutes passed, then the door creaked open. Jennifer returned, holding a small bundle, gauze, a tin of salve, a sewing needle and thread. Behind her, the innkeeper grunted as she entered with a kettle and poured steaming water into the iron tub in the corner. "Hot enough to boil a man," she said.
Good. That's what he needs.
When they were alone again, Jennifer turned back to Elijah, her expression different now. Not business, not pity, just presence.
You gonna get in?
Elijah nodded once and began to remove the rest of his clothes. Boots first, slow and stiff, then pants, peeled off one leg at a time. He left his underclothes in a heap on the floor. He stepped into the tub and sank into the scalding water with a low guttural grunt, half relief, half pain. Steam rose in soft ribbons around him, curling off his chest, his arms, his face. The water stung every wound, cleansing but merciless. His eyes fluttered closed for a moment, jaw tight. Jennifer knelt beside the tub and dipped a rag into the water, then began to gently wash his shoulders. Her touch was light, not cautious, not kind.
You always come back like this?
She asked after a while. No.
But not never.
He cracked one eye open. No. She smiled faintly.
I figured.
The rag moved across the side of his neck and down his back. She avoided the open wounds, working around them with the same steady care she might have used on a dog or a dying saint.
What is it you do, Elijah?
She asked softly. I clean up messes. She raised an eyebrow.
What kind of messes need holy bullets and a back like that?
Elijah didn't answer immediately. He just watched the steam spiral toward the ceiling. Finally, he said, "Demons, monsters, things people let in by mistake." Jennifer paused.
You kill them.
"I tried to."
And if you can't?
He shrugged. "Then I die, and someone else comes after." She didn't ask more, just nodded, like it made some kind of sense, and kept washing. After a long silence, Elijah spoke again. "There was this one in a town called Asheville, a thing called a mouther." She didn't interrupt. He told her the short version. What it looked like, what it did to the children, what had to be done to kill it, and what had to be done after. Father Alden's judgment. Jennifer's eyes glistened in the lamplight, but she didn't let the tears fall.
That's why you do this? Why you bleed for it?
Elijah let his head rest back against the edge of the tub, eyes closed again. "No. I do it because God demands it, and no one else will." Elijah stepped out of the tub slowly, water sheeting off him, steaming as it touched the cooler air of the room. His skin was flushed raw, the bruises darker now under clean light, the welts on his back red and livid like fresh ink. He dried off with a coarse linen towel, movements slow and precise. Jennifer waited with a small wooden stool near the bed, her thread and needle laid out with practiced calm. Her gaze didn't flinch when he turned, didn't shy from the sight of him. Not the ruined skin, not the brand of pain carved into every muscle and scar. Just motioned for him to sit.
This is gonna sting.
"I'd be suspicious if it didn't." She threaded the needle in silence, dipped it into one flask of clear liquor, and then got to work. The first puncture drew a grunt from Elijah, a quiet, sharp exhale through clenched teeth. She worked carefully, methodically, drawing the thread through the worst of the gashes on his side and shoulder. She didn't ask for stories this time, not until the third stitch.
What happened in New Galilee?
Elijah didn't speak at first. His jaw flexed once, then again. Jennifer waited, hands still busy. "The preacher thought he heard the voice of God. Started a church, a gospel, a movement."
But it wasn't God.
"No."
What was it?
He glanced at her and his voice was flat. "A demon. A strong one. Beautiful, powerful, lion." Jennifer's hands didn't stop moving, but she slowed just a little.
And you killed it?
Elijah nodded.
And the preacher?
"I spared him." She looked up at that and met his eyes.
Why?
Elijah didn't look away. "Because God commanded it." Jennifer said nothing for a while. When she finished the last stitch, she tied it off gently and set the needle aside. She brushed her fingertips once along the edge of his shoulder, tracing the ragged map of a life given to holy violence.
You ever think about stopping?
He let out a slow breath. "Every day. But I don't get a choice." The room dimmed as the oil lamp burned low. Outside, the wind carried laughter, the scrape of boots, the occasional crack of a bottle or slurred prayer. But inside the walls, there was nothing that needed fighting. When Jennifer was done, they got in the bed together. Jennifer pulled the covers back. Elijah lay down first, stiff but steady, the stitched skin on his back brushing the cool cotton with a hiss of discomfort. Jennifer lay beside him, draping a blanket over them both, She didn't curl into him like a lover, but she didn't keep her distance either. Her hand found his chest. His arm rested across her hip. A shared quiet. She spoke once more just before her eyes closed.
You saved that town. You know that, right?
Elijah didn't answer. Not right away. I didn't save it. I stopped it from getting worse. Jennifer nodded once. They didn't speak again. Their bodies found stillness in each other. Not pleasure, not hunger. Just the fragile relief of warmth after too long in the cold. Elijah stared at the ceiling for a long time. The scars on his back ached with every breath. But his heart and his ring, for the first time in weeks, was silent. And eventually, sleep took him. Hey everybody, Kevin from Nightmares Nightly here. If you made it this far, I want to thank you for listening. I love bringing these stories to life, and I've recently been writing a lot of my own. If you'd like to support the channel and what I do, and hear more of my own stories, please consider becoming a member, where I try to upload exclusive, ad-free stories every week. And as always, thanks for listening, everybody.